Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today I'll be continuing with the Deku and Death podfic, and this will be part 2, chapter 2, entitled Reason, Responsibilities, and Remorse. Izuku wasn't sure exactly how the situation in front of him had come to pass. His young 4-year-old head was doing its best to process the words coming out of the figure. He was so immersed by the complexity of the whole thing that Izuku completely missed the fact that the figure had sat next to him on the couch. "So let me get this straight," Izuku started. "You are Death." "I was Death." "So you're not Death anymore?" "Yes." "How does that even work?" Izuku sighed in desperation. "That doesn't even make sense." "I believe there are more pressing matters to deal with," he stated calmly, not at all annoyed by Izuku's endless questioning. Izuku looked up curiously. That was true. The figure hadn't really explained his purpose or objective to the boy yet. It made him wonder why a being like himself would reveal his existence to a mere 4-year-old child, a quirkless one at that. "As I said before, I was the embodiment of Death at one point," he continued. "It was my job to collect and sort the souls of those who roamed in my territory." "Wait, territory?" Izuku interrupted. "There's more than one of you?" "Yes," the figure put it quite bluntly. "There are billions of souls on this plane. I would get quite overwhelmed if I was alone." "Ah, that is fair," Izuku murmured softly. The man continued. "The role of Death is oddly similar to an ordinary job. We are allowed to retire and pass our job to others, though not without serving a minimum of a century's work." "A century?" Izuku cried. "Yes, that is the minimum, but many Deaths work for much longer. I personally do not remember how long I worked. I stopped counting 5 centuries in." "Wow," Izuku stammered. "That's a long time." "Yes, but that is besides the point." He paused for a moment, looking at the boy. Izuku couldn't pick up on any facial expressions, obviously, but by the way his shoulders slouched, he could tell these next words were weighing on the mysterious man. "Once a Death wishes to be at peace, we are relieved from our duties. Someone else must take our place, though. Our successors are not of our choosing." He stopped for a moment before continuing with his thought. "No one knows who chooses them, really, but the previous Death must meet with their successor to properly teach them how to execute the role." It was at that moment that Izuku's 4-year-old brain finally put the pieces together. With wide eyes, he finally broke eye contact with the figure, staring at his hands while picking at them nervously. The boy started, his mouth failing him. "I'm your successor, aren't I?" "If I had known I was going to place such a burden on a child, I would have stuck it out another decade or so." The man had given Izuku some time to really process all that happened within the last hour. For the young boy, no amount of time could have ever been enough, though. The figure had insisted that they get started as soon as possible, as Izuku was effectively the new Death as soon as he had laid eyes on him. Izuku learned exactly what his new job was. He had to sort the souls of beings who had already passed, and assign them a realm of the afterlife to wander. He could only sort one at a time, but once he held the soul, all the information of that being's lifespan would come to him. He and the man practiced a few times to get the hang of it. Izuku couldn't describe the feelings that washed through him as he held a soul, but he could describe the souls themselves. The souls looked like puffs of light. They were all the same color, a light washed-out yellow that faded into white, almost like a light bulb. When he held a soul, he could feel the rush of information to his head. It made him a bit woozy the first few times, but Izuku had grown quickly to love the feeling. He always had a passion for analyzing, though normally it was quirks and not human lives, but it was a passion nonetheless. Sorting them, though, was a whole different experience. When the figure first displayed how to summon the entities to the afterlife, Izuku was worried, and rightfully so. How big were these entryways? Were they two-way transportation? Could someone come out of them? The figure thought, though, had patiently sat through his mumblings, just finally responded with a simple, "Just try it." And so Izuku did his best to copy the mysterious man's example, slowly swiping his arm in front of himself in a horizontal manner, while delicately concentrating on creating whatever the heck these entries were supposed to look like. He was considerably startled when 3 monochromatic flames appeared right before his eyes, simply floating in midair. "These are the 3 main layers to the afterlife," the figure began suddenly, startling the poor child even more. There is paradise, he started, gesturing towards the first flame on the left, a white one that seemed to shine happily, for those who have done good in their lifespan or properly made up for their evils. The figure then shifted towards a dreary black flame, all the way on the right, completely skipping over the one in the middle. There is the underworld, he continued, for those who have committed considerable evils in their lifespan and could not make up for them. Finally, the figure turned to face the final flame, a light gray one that seemed to sway as if there was a light breeze coming from somewhere. Then there is purgatory, he finished, for those who had unfinished business in this plane or have committed minor evils and could not make up for them. Some souls simply wander purgatory because they are confused and cannot accept their situation. Unlike the other two areas, souls in purgatory have a second chance to be moved to paradise or the underworld, though that decision isn't up to you. He stopped talking, giving the child time to register this new information. It was a lot for the young boy to take in, but he did his best to understand the gravity of the situation. Somehow, though, through the muddy thoughts of All Might and Kachan and his parents and quirks, Izuku's head realized just how important of a job he had, something he couldn't really afford to joke around with, unlike the earlier topics. You must decide where each soul will go. That is your job. What? The boy exclaimed. But that's a huge responsibility. What if I get it wrong? Or I don't do good enough? What will happen to... You were chosen for this, he exclaimed. They must have faith in you. Besides, if those who run each realm do not agree, they simply will send the soul back to you. Though that is usually unlikely. I can only remember a few instances for myself each century. Izuku let out an audible sigh of relief at the figure's encouragement. Though I must mention that each soul must be sorted and sent off within 24 hours of you receiving it, he added suddenly. This is one of the few major rules. The higher-ups do not take lightly when this rule is broken. Izuku's relief quickly turned into sheer horror. But there are hundreds of souls here, he exclaimed, swinging his arms around himself to emphasize the point. We've got to get started, like, right now. And so Izuku began sorting his first ever batch of souls. With the figure's guidance, of course, it was a lot of pressure to handle. He was really surprised the child didn't break down at the sight of this responsibility, but Izuku managed to hold it all in, and honed in on the task at hand. New souls trickled in as Izuku sorted the ones that the figure brought him, but never enough that he felt overwhelmed. He and the figure just kept working. They worked through the latest episode of Mighty Adventures, missing it completely. It had been a new episode, too. They worked past lunch with the boy grabbing a small granola bar from the cupboard. His mother still wasn't home yet. Neither was his father. It was around 2 in the afternoon when the child heard the front door start to creak open. He instinctively panicked, afraid that whoever was about to walk in would discover his secret. The figure had managed to calm him down and reassured Izuku that only he could see the souls, flames, and the man himself. The boy still insisted that they move to his room once he greeted whoever was at the door, preferring to keep his mumbles about the souls and their lives away from prying ears. It had been Inko who walked through the door. She gasped at seeing her son on the couch, staring right at her. Fumbling her hands around, she stuttered out a slight greeting before rushing to the kitchen, clearly not expecting the confrontation, if there even was one. Izuku sighed heavily before getting up to move to the solitude of his bedroom, the figure trailing behind. There were no grocery bags in her hands. Izuku and the figure continued to sort out souls until the mysterious man told the child that they could finally stop. They had sent away a good majority of the souls, and as long as Izuku kept tabs on which ones needed to be sorted soon, he could stop for the day. The young boy used the free time to plan out a new schedule for himself, concerning the souls and their time limits. He figured he'd need to do some sorting at least 3 times a day, and decided to correspond them to each meal. He would have to get up early for the morning ones, as the amount of souls he would accumulate while sleeping would be enormous. Izuku believed he could get away with eating lunch alone in the corner of the lunchroom for the afternoon sessions. And lastly, he could sort of do some more sorting after dinner, when he would have the most time alone. It would definitely be different, but he would still give it his all, as someone had chosen him for this role purposefully. At least, that's what Izuku liked to think. It was definitely a shock being quirkless, and after hearing his parents last night, the child was feeling quite dejected. Useless, even, as his own father didn't accept him. He was desperate to attach his newly fading hope to something, so realizing that he was effectively Death's successor, his brain immediately turned to the fact that someone must have considered him worthy of knowing secrets of life after death, at least. But that was enough for Izuku. He was happy that someone still saw potential in him, even when he himself was doubting it. The mysterious man struck up conversation with the small boy. Once the silence set in for the first time that Saturday, he exclaimed that all Death were gifted with powers to help them with their roles, though at this point it was mostly for aesthetics. At the mention of powers, Izuku's head perked up. The figure let out a slight chuckle at that, or at least Izuku thought it was a chuckle. He promised to explain more in the morning, as today had been long enough and eventful on its own. Disappointed, the child nodded slowly and went back to figuring out his new schedule for school, writing it down in his quirk analysis notebook with a few footnotes here and there. The silence was eating away at the young boy as he tapped his pencil on the wooden desk where he often wrote his quirk analysis. "So, do you have a name?" Izuku started, seemingly out of nowhere. "I mean, I can't keep calling you Mister all the time." "Well, I won't be around for much longer," the figure responded. What? What do you mean?" Izuku cried in disbelief. The mysterious man couldn't leave him yet. They had gotten along so well. "I did retire for a reason," he stated harshly. "Once I finish teaching you the basics, I'm off to finally rest." Oh, Izuku whispered. He did have a point, even if it did break the child's tiny heart. He started up again. "As for my name, I'm afraid I don't remember it. I've lost most of my memories to time itself. It happens when you work for centuries on end." Izuku looked up pitifully. How sad it must be to not even know your own name. "Well, I could—" The boy hushed. "I could give you one." The figure turned to the child with a curious stance. "Well, I suppose that is all right. Just make it appropriate." Izuku grinned widely. Bouncing in his chair, his mind picked itself for a good name that the man might enjoy, something classy or something more unique. Izuku wasn't quite sure what his preference might be. What about Gami?" Izuku murmured. The man shifted his head, made no noise that confirmed or denied the name. Izuku became nervous and focused more on his hands. "Like Shinigami, but shorter, since you were Death at one point. It fits you, but leaves just enough mystery to grow onto its own name, completely separate from its original meaning." The figure stared blankly for a few more seconds. "Gami. I like it." Izuku was pleased with himself, and Gami couldn't help but relax at the sight of the cheerful 4-year-old boy happily swaying in his chair. Ah, the sight of childhood innocence. What a wonderfully ignorant feeling. Gami felt slightly uplifted at the fact that Izuku was in his own little world right now. Hopefully he would stay that way for the night. Then maybe Izuku wouldn't have to hear the fact that the two voices were currently screaming at each other in the kitchen. Gami really didn't like that man. This concludes Chapter 2 of Deku and Death. Really enjoying this fic so far. Hope you guys are as well. And as always, thank you so much for listening.